Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is our weekly HEALEY ALS platform trial. We're waiting for people to join from the waiting room. So just giving everyone a few seconds to join. And this is Sabrina Paganoni. I'm speaking from the HEALEY Center for ALS. I'm joined tonight by Dr. Mary Sukovic, who is the PI of the platform trial, Dr. James Barry, who is the co-lead investigator of one of the regimens in the platform trial, Regimen C, testing CNM AU8. And tonight we also have Michael Ochkin from Clean Nanomedicine, the manufacturer of CNM AU8, as well as our patient navigators, Alison and Catherine. And I know tonight as always, we want to provide our weekly updates. However, tonight we also want to focus specifically on Regimen C of the platform trial because of some recent news about starting an expanded access program sponsored by Clean Nanomedicine. So as always, for those of you who are joining our regular updates, I'll provide sort of our quick updates as always, as every week. And then we welcome obviously all questions like we do every week, but specifically tonight, if you have any questions about CNM-AU8, Clean Nanomedicine or Regimen C, the platform trial, we have all the right people on the call. So we wanted to provide this forum for people who have questions. So if we can go to the next slide. Again, as a reminder, I know we are getting a few more people in the audience, and we're getting more people to join this webinar in 2023. So as a quick reminder, this is a platform trial where we're using a shared infrastructure and master protocol to gain efficiencies in terms of time, resources, and we're reducing the number of people on placebo by using this overall infrastructure. And I know many of you have been following this for a while, but just for those of you who are new, we're basically testing multiple regimens in parallel and sequentially. Some started in 2020 and have concluded, others are ongoing, and some are planned for 2023. Next slide. So the general schema for each regimen, and by regimen I mean a drug, is that people with ALS who are interested in participating in the trial are screened for eligibility. We try to keep the screening period as short as possible, just a few weeks until they, if they are eligible, they can randomize within a regimen to active or placebo. If we have more than one regimen available at any given time, they're randomly assigned to one of the active regimens. And then within the regimen, they're randomized 3-to-1 active to placebo. The randomized period lasts 24 weeks, which is about 6 months. And then at the end of that, everyone who completes those 24 weeks is eligible to go on open label extension, also known as active treatment extension. So what this means essentially is that after participants have been on active or placebo for the randomized period of the trial, they continue long-term for variable amounts of time on active drug for sure. And then we compare people who started the active drug first to the people who started the active drug 6 months later. So that's kind of the general schema. Next slide. And we have been testing multiple regimens. So we started in 2020, and the goal of the trial is to continue to grow and to continue to adapt. And that's why we have regimens at different stages of development, meaning that some have started and completed. Regimen E specifically, testing trialose, which is made by Silos Therapeutics, is enrolling right now. I'll spend just a couple of minutes on that. And then we have regimens F and G in partnership with Calico and Denali, respectively, which will be available in 2023. And we are also in conversations with other companies. Next slide. So specifically right now, we are still enrolling. We really want to enroll the last few participants in Regimen E, testing trialose. If any of you is interested in that particular regimen, I would really highly recommend the webinars that are advertised on this slide, where you can learn everything about the science behind trialose, as well as what that would practically mean for people to enroll in Regimen E, the 5th regimen of the platform trial. So I would refer you to those resources. Next slide. We are enrolling at 60 sites of regimen for this regimen, and you can see the map on the slide. And as always, every week, for those of you who are new, we share QR codes, links, and then our patient navigators are always available to answer questions, or you can also answer questions live here. Next slide. And we are almost done with enrollment, but not quite yet. So we really are looking for new participants. The last few participants, we are kind of almost 90% in with Regimen E, but we really want to complete enrollment as soon as possible so that then we can move on with the other regimens. So thank you again for to all of you who have been supporting this trial and following these updates. So hopefully we'll announce completion of enrollment soon. But if you're interested in joining, please contact your site because we still have a few spots available. Next slide. And as always, Catherine and Alison are here to answer your questions even outside of this forum. And we will continue to have weekly webinars. So again, all announcements about enrollment and other topics will be here every week. And we have great guest speakers coming on the webinar over the next few weeks. Next slide. All recordings are also available on the MGH website. Actually, we've seen really an increase in number of people following our recordings, so thank you for that. Next slide. And for the big topic of tonight, so we really wanted to create this forum to make sure that we answer all of your questions about Regimen C. As a reminder, Regimen C is one of the regimens of the platform trial testing CNM-EU8. And again, as I said earlier, we're really excited to have here Dr. James Berry, the co-lead investigator of Regimen C, and a close colleague, as well as Michael Ochkin, who works at Clean Nanomedicine, which is the company that's manufacturing the drug tested in Regimen C, also known as CNM-EU8. So I'll turn this over to James and then Michael to say a few words about the overall journey of Regimen C and what's next for Regimen C participants. James?
Thanks, Sabrina. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll just say a few words, and then I think Michael will be able to talk about some of the changes that are going on that I think are being rolled out very thoughtfully and meticulously, and with a lot of kind of consideration of what this means to all of the people in the OLE, but also the people we can extend the opportunity to take clean in an expanded access program. So, as you see on the slide, the primary endpoint was not met, but there was a very important secondary endpoint analysis of survival, and there was a significant reduction in risk in that analysis of death or permanent assisted ventilation. And I think that's something that has led to the idea that we can go on with the clinical development, which is really exciting. While that clinical development continues, an expanded access program really fits well in the meantime. There are some logistical and theoretical reasons that are pretty powerful to move from an open label extension at this point to an expanded access program, including in being able to involve more people, reducing the burden of being in a study, collecting the critical information and sort of focusing on that, and just reducing burden on sites, the company, and participants. So, Michael, if you want to talk about maybe the plans for how this is going to happen and expand it all on the reasons for it, that would be great.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much, James, and thank you for the invitation today. So certainly, I want to reinforce and reiterate that Clean is committed to people living with ALS, and we are moving from the continued conduct of the OLE and transitioning into a broadened expanded access protocol. And what we want to do is not just take people who are in Regimen C, but make the EAP available to up to 200 individuals within the receiving care within the United States at sites who are either HEALEY sites or those that want to participate in the EAP. And so we're giving priority first to all individuals who were in the Regimen C open label extension. And we'll prioritize all of those sites who had ongoing people living with ALS. And then secondly, after we get that bolus of individuals into the EAP program, then we'll start enrolling additional individuals who don't otherwise qualify for the ongoing HEALEY platform regimens E, F, and G.
I lost my unmute button for a moment there. There are a few questions that have come in to sort of expand on some of what you said, and so I'll maybe read a few of these or summarize them. one that I'll sort of address first, and then Michael will get your thoughts on this too, is, what are the why and what are the implications for the EAP being run by Clean rather than, by the HEALEY Center or as part of the HEALEY companion EAP. And I'll take a first crack at that, there are both are viable ways to run a study. The benefit of running the companion EAPs kind of through the HEALEY Center is that they can really be designed to go alongside the HEALEY platform trial. At this point, that's not really a necessary or consideration, and there are some efficiencies to Clean running this. So it's really operational. And the other thing to know is that in general, there are differences, but oftentimes the sponsor will use what's called a clinical research organization to run the trial. And so it's not the company that's doing every jot and tittle, but another company that runs trials and can provide those services in a sort of a general kind of a way, just like HEALEY Center does. So there are some efficiencies here. There's no other sort of reason to do this specifically. Michael, do you want to?
Right. No, I'd say we very much appreciated our partnership with the HEALEY team. Everything was excellent, and you are all amazing. In this instance, it becomes much more operationally efficient for Clean to manage the EAP, and we've designed the EAP to be less resource intensive and less onerous as far as a burden for the number of assessments are virtually nil unless the trial site wants to actually collect FUC data or functional rating scale data. All of those are optional. And so this is a way primarily of expanding access to CNM-Au8 to existing Regimen C participants and then beyond.
Great. And I completely agree. It's been a wonderful, it's been a wonderful partnership. We're not, we're still working together. Here we are on the call together. We still have a lot of data to look at from the trial. None of that is changing. This is they're just some operational choices that make sense.
Can I ask a question, please? This came up with our patient advisory group. I want to just make this point that how are you prioritizing the people who were in the Clean OLE, versus kind of new people, or how are you going to manage that so there won't be a very long time where someone might not have access to the drug who was in the OLE?
Right. So at this point, we reached out to all of the clinical trial sites that had Regimen C OLE participants, and we have new contracting with each of those sites to enable the regulatory framework to conduct the EAP, and we're prioritizing all of the sites first before we open any incremental sites. And then once we have all of the sites that are interested in participating contracted and up and running, then we'll, on a selective basis, start enrolling additional sites that are interested in participating in the EAP.
Michael, just to expand on that, so there are a number of questions that have come in that are sort of related concepts. One is that everybody understands that the contracting process can be long. What are some aspects about this EAP that make you hopeful that you can get these contracts done more quickly than a more complicated clinical trial?
Yeah, and I think you've identified it. It's pretty, again, the primary purpose is access. So there's very minimal collection. There's a visit schedule that's roughly every 12 weeks. And we've had, and there's not a lot of data that's generated around that either. So there are a lot of, nuances the lawyers have to address. So in this case, we already have our first two contracts that are being returned this week to the sites that are furthest along in that process. And we hope to have those first two contracts executed imminently, and then we can start supplying those sites with CNM-Au8.
Great. And a few people, for a variety of reasons, have asked about whether they have to participate at the site that they've been at the OLE for, or can they change to a different site for the EAP?
I think that's a decision best left between the person living with ALS and their clinician, but we're agnostic to that approach, and we'll support either depending on what works best for the clinician and the individual with ALS.
And so just to put a very fine point on a different study, no requirement that people enroll in the same site. They're not.
Correct. No requirement that people enroll in the same site.
And there've been a couple of questions about how long the drug stays in the system, and what happens if people stop the drug. And could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I can give a little context first from a regulatory perspective and what FDA allows us to do for an investigational drug like CNM-Au8. As we end the OLE, we have to open up a new regulatory path, which is the EAP that we've already filed with FDA. But that means all of the drug that we've supplied under the open label extension has to be returned as part of the study closeout activities while we open new drug supply and ship those to patients that's approved again by FDA for conduct of the EAP. Now, the half-life of CNM-Au8 is about 28 days, give or take. And we typically think of 5 half-lives before a drug fully leaves the system. And so we would expect that CNM-Au8 has some level of effect for several months. And we're hopeful and we're working diligently to get all of the interested sites up and running as rapidly as we can.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a really important point. A couple more operational questions and a few scientific questions. So operational as well. Why can't participants who are in the OLE just keep the drug that they're on and use that until they get into the EAP?
Sure, and that was what I was alluding to by the regulatory framework. As we close, continue participation in the OLE and transition to the EAP, that regulatory path is closing as well, and we have to establish a new one under the EAP, and that's why that drug has to come back.
Yeah, and I'll just I think that's exactly right. And I'll just say that it would be easier to, if we could just say, well, just keep taking your drug until you're in a new study. This is not an approved drug. It continues to be an experimental drug. There are a lot of controls on sort of how we manage that. I think, the operational benefits of having an expanded access program that is really streamlined are really made this sort of any of the downsides sort of outweighed any of the downsides of changing the programs. And I think that's an important point and something we're trying to convey here. Because remember that the significant effect was survival and staving off need for invasive ventilation. So that's data that is easy to come by and can be collected as a part of an EAP. So that leads us to our next set of questions, Michael, which is, does this EAP, is there anything useful data-wise to be gotten from an EAP, and does it have any role in the regulatory pathway as you move toward a phase 3 trial?
Sure. So one of the things we'll be doing is in the long run, being able to tie participants who were originally in the OLE and then continued on the EAP, and we'll be able to track their vital status and continue that data, partnering with the MGH team to see how that affects long-term survival as well. As Dr. Paganoni alluded to, looking at that delay of 6 months and how that impacts overall status before patients continued in the OLE. And then we'll also continue to accrue greater safety experience, which is important for regulatory authorities like the FDA. But I think vital status and ongoing safety are the 2 outcomes that an EAP can help support.
Great. We've sort of answered this question, but I just want to be very, very clear about it for the people who are on the call. How many spots are sort of reserved for people in the OLE? Do they need to worry about competition from people who haven't been in the OLE? And then how many spots overall in the EAP?
No. So amongst the 200 slots that we're opening currently, we're dedicating reserve space for everyone currently in the OLE. So there's no competition, no issues whatsoever. And then once we have confirmation from every site, whether they're participating in the OLE and what patients will enroll, at that point, we'll open the incremental slots up to the 200. And then we're hopeful, and I'm going to knock on wood, that we can continue to support even more than 200 slots. But as of today, that's our current plan.
Okay, great. And then just there have been a few questions about how you alluded to a visit schedule of about every 12 weeks. How many in-person visits are required for the EAP?
So no in-person visits are required for the EAP.
Great. Really important. I mean, again, it just speaks to the flexibility that comes with an expanded access program, with really the primary purpose being, providing access to the drug, as opposed to a clinical trial, which is, often but not always includes placebo, or an open label extension where there isn't placebo, but it's still sort of following that paradigm of a trial. There's one that I think we all are anxiously awaiting. There's a question about when more data will be available about subgroups from the platform trial. And I don't know, Merritt or Sabrina, do you want to start with that? And this is sort of essentially speaking to when will more data be available from the platform trial. And I would extend it just from subgroups to saying, you know, there's also, you know, secondary endpoints, and we're working hard on, you know, aligning all the data for that. A lot of data from these trials.
Yeah, I think there's somewhere around 4,000 tables from each of these. There'll be a couple ways that the more information will come out. When we're completely done with the analyses of the double blind, we'll be submitting papers, and we'll be doing another webinar for participants and for the community. Then when we lock the open label databases, those will also be analyzed, and we've pre-specified a lot of I think important analyses that will be, you know, particularly important for clean, but also for the other regimens. And we would again also share those. So I think this is going to be in stage that, you know, the next quarter will kind of be presenting on a complete data set for the first 4, and then later, probably early spring, on the open label.
Great. Sabrina or Michael, I don't know if you want to expand on that, or the work that's going into this data, or what we might see.
But it's a lot of data, and actually this is true for both these regimen and all the other regimens. And on this webinar, we explained that there's a lot of you know, kind of the primary goals, the secondary goals. Then there's a large group of exploratory analysis, biomarkers, genetics, etc. That, you know, is taking time to look at, just because of the volume. So we're really excited to be working on all of these, and we'll be sure to provide updates as we've been so far.
It's been, you know, it is a joy to have all this data to look at. It is also, you know, it's a lot to do, and make sure that it's all gathered with the care that it needs to be gathered with, checked with all the care it needs to be checked with, and then analyzed with the, you know, with the care that it needs to be analyzed with. And that means a lot of double checks. And again, it's been just such a pleasure to do that with Clean all along. It's been a wonderful experience. There's Michael, just getting down to sort of brass tacks. I think there are some questions about sort of, you know, what is the end of the open label extension? When can we expect those final visits to happen?
I'm going to send that back to you, James. I think you're closer to the, you know, operational side of the OLE.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So okay. So we're and I have to remind myself, Sabrina, you have the actual date in
So we are planning for the last what we call early termination visit, meaning the last in-person visit to be done by essentially the end of the month, so January 24th.
January 24th. Okay. Yeah.
And then what happens is that per protocol, everyone who finishes completes participation will have a follow-up safety call, which is actually a quick call just to check in, and that's done essentially within a month, so before the end of February.
So
and all of this while the EAP obviously gets up and running.
Right. So the January 24th is the date that we chose for that last visit. Now, importantly, we've talked about this a couple of times, but I do want to just emphasize that we need to get the unused drug back, and all of the, as always with all of these, you know, the packaging for the drug that's been used. And that's important from a regulatory perspective. So that'll be a part of those final visits, is to either collect the drug or mail you something that you can mail the drug back in. One other quick point, which is that, you know, there is this regulation that we, for good reason, that we follow up with people 28 days after the end of a trial. And so with last visit on January 24th, then 28 days after that will be the last follow-up phone call. There is nothing to say that people can't start in the EAP before that if it's available and if they can enroll. And so you're not waiting for that final phone call to do that. You'll still have the final phone call, but you don't have to wait for that final phone call to enroll in the expanded access program. Thank you for helping me with the date, Sabrina. I couldn't remember exactly which day at the end of January it was.
There's a few final questions in rapid fire. I don't know, James, if you want to kind of to go over those. is there anything that we didn't address?
Yeah, so there's some more scientific questions here that have come up. I'm looking at, we've got 3 minutes. So can you do remote visits and lab work done locally on this EAP?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's like some people were doing the OLE. Michael, any very high level additional data on rescue ALS trial that might be interesting to people? This is the Australian trial, phase 2.
Certainly, and that data we're hoping to present shortly. We have both long-term open label extension from the rescue study, as well as long-term biomarkers that are emerging. Then I'm eagerly awaiting those tables, which we hope to have kind of within the first few months of this year.
Great. Unblinding plan for platform trial. Any updates on that? Either Sabrina or Merritt, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't have updates yet. We're actually meeting now with each of the companies to go through that timeline, and it'll be different for each one because of the different outcomes. But we'll share as soon as we have that information.
And we know that this is on people's minds, and we know that it's important. There are some regulatory considerations, some scientific considerations, and we just have to balance those. But we, to do what we can, but we know that it's important to people to know that, important for us to get that out as soon as we can as well.
Right. And then if I might also add, if there's any additional questions about the EAP, individuals are free to email eap@clean.com, and I'll put that in the chat as well.
Yep. Just to clear up one misconception, or one thing we may not have conveyed quite right. It's not that there's no data collection with the EAP. It's just that the data collection is integrated more easily. It's a much lighter load of data that we're collecting, focused on where we think we see the effect in the trial. And there's a question about enrolling in Regimen E, which I think just based on time we'll probably push off to either follow up next time, or Catherine, maybe you can follow up with that question offline. Michael, I want to thank you for being here. From my perspective, it's just been wonderful to work with you, and we can hand it back over to Sabrina.
And just if you don't mind, because we're not going to be full by January 24th, so I can answer that. So please, thank you for your interest in Regimen E, and we'll keep going. Sorry, James, to cut you off.
Oh no, that's okay. No, I was just going to say, actually, Sabrina, Merritt, if you want to, end, but that's a really important thing. So for Regimen E, still enrolling. Sabrina, you want to?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the final words are really that, Regimen E is still enrolling. So please, thank you so much for all your interest, and don't hesitate to contact us even outside of this webinar. We will be back next week. If by any chance we missed any questions, or you have additional questions about Regimen C or any other topics, please don't hesitate to send them to Alison, Catherine in the meantime, or come back next week. Again, we really want to continue to address your questions and continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, my appreciation and kudos to the MGH team.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Take care.